Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call the meeting of the Richmond City Council for Monday, February 28th, 2022 to order. I have a motion on the minutes. Any discussion on that? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Madam Clerk, any agenda additions or deletions?
Thank you, Your Worship. We have one agenda addition. It'll be number 14A, and it'll be titled Ukrainian Flag. And then we also have one agenda correction, and that's on CNCL 9 in the Bylaws section. The fourth bylaw, number 9834, should have opposition noted for all readings with Councillor Day opposed.
All right, may I have a motion on the agenda with those changes? Moved and seconded. Discussion, all those in favor, opposed, carried. There are no delegations who have signed up, so we can go straight into the consent agenda, which includes the receipt of the committee minutes, the 2022 UBCM Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program grant submission, the draft terms of reference for the Community Poverty Reduction and Prevention Table, housekeeping amendments to the Drainage, Dike, and Sanitary Sewer System Bylaw 7551, similarly to the Waterworks and Water Rates Bylaw number 5637, and to the Parking and Loading Bylaw 8500. Then we have land use applications for first reading, which will be further considered at the public hearing on March 21st. First of all, there's 65, 71, and 6591 number 1 road rezoning from single detached RS1F to low density townhouse RTL4, and the establishment of the underlying zoning for properties developed under land use contracts, and they're set out there in the agenda. And finally, the official community plan targeted to update the proposed scope and process. May I have a motion to adopt those by general consent? Moved and seconded. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I'll be supporting everything on the agenda and a few things to staff if I could. I'm going to be definitely supporting the poverty reduction action plan, but also the application form. I'm not sure who's on it, but it says a project coordinator will be hired on a contract to implement the project. Have we thought of assigning, to me, the poverty issue is very, very important, and it takes the whole community to deal with it. Have we assigned a staff member to that, and would we be thinking down the road? It's great to have a coordinator or a consultant, but would this be a full-time staff member? Whoever can answer that.
For your worship, to Councillor McNulty, this specific project is related to a specific grant project to develop a series of drop-in programs at the library. City and library staff will oversee the grant project, and a consultant will be hired to help with the implementation of the grant. In addition, there will be the steering committee that will be from the Community Poverty Reduction and Prevention Table. Okay,
I have no problem. I support everything you've done, but I guess I'm trying to take it one step further. At the end of the day, a committee of 12 members who will probably be volunteers will contribute, and we appreciate what they will be able to do. But I'm thinking more if we're going to address this issue, and it says over 10 years, that it may we may look at a, for the sake of argument, the moment tonight, a poverty response coordinator on staff. Or am I going too far ahead?
You're going too far ahead. No, seriously, you take the first step and then we'll see.
Okay, well, we've outlined it, Your Worship, and I was kind of curious if we're going to do this. I support it 100%, and I think it's excellent, and we're going in the right direction. I had a question of a transportation staff or the chair of Public Works. On our page CNCL 89, we look at a number of apartments and stuff, and the parking oversupply estimate. Some of the figures in oversupply, if I read the graph right and read the report right, are pretty high. So telling me we didn't need that parking? And maybe we should be looking at how we address parking in apartments?
Lloyd?
Through your worship, Councillor McNulty, absolutely. This is why this amendment will propose a further reduction in parking that's available to developers as we move forward. Because we've looked at the data that we've gotten from a 2019 study from Metro Vancouver, and we feel that we can reduce the parking to a little bit lower level so that we don't have an oversupply in the future.
Well, thank you very much. I thought the report was very good. Compliments to you and your staff. And the fact that we brought that out, I just want to make sure we don't shortchange ourselves and how that will reflect in terms of other parking requirements we had. Have we reviewed the other parking requirements in the townhouse areas and as opposed to apartments? I know it's like 1.54.
Yeah. Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, clearly those are smaller numbers and they're harder to deal with that way. Like if we were to reduce parking in a smaller unit, like say a townhouse complex, 20% would be a really, really big number because it'll end up, you'll get like a quarter of a car or something like that, and it'll be difficult, right? So this is really more for larger developments, but certainly on a case-by-case basis, when development comes to us with their proposals, we do review them and we do look at their proposals, and particularly if they do a transportation study and provide appropriate TDMs, we do consider that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and keep up the good work. It was a good report. Thank you. And the last thing I wanted to, came from actual planning, Your Worship, was official community plan target update and the scope and the process. I support everything we're doing on that and how we're doing, and the sooner we get at it, the better. The themes that came in terms of the scope and the target areas, I support. I guess I had a couple of questions of staff in that, will we have progress reports, a status report of what we've got now, because we've done a lot in some of these areas. We just the other night, for example, the climate change and sustainability, we made a 75-page document of things we're doing. And then getting a report as building from that so that we can continue. We're not going to reinvent the wheel here, are we?
Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, yes, we will be giving council regular updates through the OCP review. They can be through forms of memos and reports as we move through it, and we're certainly not looking at reinventing the wheel. This is a deep dive OCP review that's looking at alternative policies and essentially a not business as usual approach.
Yeah. In terms of the housing, if I just may, Your Worship, looking at ownership, we'll call housing ownership versus rental. And it was very important. I've got a lot of feedback since the last planning committee meeting in terms of our rental replacement policy. I wonder if staff could just quickly review that for the public on it, because I think it's important, even though that wasn't in here saying we do have a rental replacement formula. I wonder if Mr. Hopkins can do that for us quickly.
Sure. Through your worship to Councillor McNulty, we do have a policy in our OCP that supports rental and protects rental buildings, and if they were to be demolished and replaced, that there would be a requirement that the existing units are replaced as lemur units, and that they're like for like, and that they are ground oriented if that's what's being replaced, and that they're of an approximate similar size, and that there would also be a tenant replacement policy or tenant relocation policy, whereas the existing tenants would be moved to another location at the cost of the developer and be given right of first refusal once the project has been rebuilt at lemur rates. And any additional density would have to be rental only.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I think that's very, very important. I went out there. My last point on this report, I would like our CNCL 249. I was looking for incentives that the city could explore a little bit more. I noticed we got density-based criteria, et cetera, to encourage livability on the, we're not just looking at housing, but we're looking at a whole community here. And I'm just wondered whether that was an oversight or that will be coming down the road with regard to the city buying property and looking at it and building itself.
Through your worship, with Councillor McNulty, certainly we'll be looking at incentives for housing, but for livability, we'll be basically trying to look under every stone possible to look at other models in other jurisdictions to understand what incentives are used and which ones are successful and which ones can be applied to the Richmond context.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this. With these 6 corollaries, I call them, and directions we're taking, it's going to take us in the right direction to build a future and comprehensive city and a livable city that families and young people will continue to want to come here. So thank you very much for it, and the sooner we pass this and get on, to be quite frank with you, the better off we'll go, and looking forward to it. So thank you, Your Worship.
All right, Councillor McPhail.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting all the items on the consent agenda and would like to speak to 2. Number 13, the establishment of underlying zoning for properties developed under land use contracts. So consistent with the Local Government Act, Council is considering bylaws to establish underlying zoning for the properties developed under the remaining land use contracts in the city prior to June 30th, 2022, and to provide for the termination of all land use contracts on June 30th, 2024. As we found out through earlier work, affected property owners and tenants may be unaware that their property is governed by a land use contract and will likely be unfamiliar with the provincial requirement for the city to establish underlying zoning for their property. So this could lead to some confusion. So I'm glad to see that staff will be mailing an information package to the affected owners and tenants with an invitation to contact city staff with any questions they may have about the process. As the report highlights, we have been dealing with the land use contract since 2014, and should Council adopt the 15 underlying zoning bylaws proposed with this report, the process for dealing with the city's remaining land use contracts will be completed. Thank you to staff for this report and for all the work on this subject. I do remember some long public hearings in the past. Number 14, official community plan targeted update, proposed scope and process. Well, as all of Council knows, an official community plan is a legally required city bylaw which enables City Council to plan, coordinate, and manage the city's sustainability, social, economic, and land use interests over the long term. The official community plan also establishes what the city wants to be by a certain time in the future. Its vision and policies indicate if, how, and where land uses may remain or change, and that new uses may be allowed. OCPs must also meet legislative requirements, for example, by establishing appropriate housing policies to meet anticipated needs for a period of at least 5 years. So some comments that I have. So our last official community plan was approved in 2012. And over the last 10 years, we've had many comments from citizens, but some of them that have stuck with me is that we have heard from some folks who live within areas of Richmond that with redevelopment, stores have left and the area is lacking, much needed retail services. So a question through you, Your Worship, to staff. Will the official community plan review look at ways to encourage the development of retail services to make neighborhoods more livable and walkable?
Through your worship to Councillor McPhail, although it's not listed as one of the targeted areas, it certainly will be part of what I would call the administrative updates. We're going to be obviously looking at affordable housing policies, and which will address densities and looking at intensifying areas such as neighborhood service centers, arterial roads, and of course the city center villages. So with that, you would need them to be complete communities, which would include retail and other sort of community-related services. So absolutely, that will be part of the review.
Great. I'm also concerned about the traffic, and while staff have assured us with the current OCP that the existing city roads, complemented by the planned road improvements, will be sufficient to meet the traffic needs of Richmond for the next decade, I do believe we will need to, it'll need to be reviewed and assessed. So a question through you, Your Worship, to staff. Will we be looking at the impact of the new road systems, traffic patterns, increased population in this review?
Through Your Worship to Councillor McPhail, I'll take a start on this, and I see Mr. B is also online. To begin with, and I should add that this OCP review is an integrated review with other departments. It's not just policy planning's OCP, it's a city OCP. It involves transportation, engineering, park services, and sustainability, and many other departments. So when we're looking at this targeted review, obviously there's going to be implications to transportation to a certain degree, whether it's parking reductions, or we're looking at, we're even looking at longer-term trends such as autonomous vehicles, which may require less roads in the future. These are the types of trends that we'll be looking at, and so transportation will definitely be an integrated component in this review. And Mr. B, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to this.
No, I have nothing to add to that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Affordable housing. So we've been talking about this topic for several years now, and I know that we have referrals out on incentives for extra density, parking relaxations, or development cost levies waivers. But, recently, over the last couple of months, many economists and provincial and federal politicians are now saying that even with incentives and other measures, it is getting more supply to the market that will have the most impact on skyrocketing home prices and the housing crisis. Through you, Your Worship, to staff, will we be looking at ways to increase housing supply across the continuum in this review?
So, through Your Worship to Councillor McPhail, that's certainly one component, is looking at additional supply. I think we'll also be looking at how to control demand as well. We're noticing that even though we've been managed to provide enough supply to the market, the cost of housing has gone up exponentially. So it's going to be looking at all the factors that go into housing, and as far as ways that we can look at decreasing the speculative increase in the cost of land, so that perhaps if we look at density bonusing, perhaps it's only for affordable housing rather than allowing density bonusing for, in exchange for other community amenities. We have to look at different models to curb the cost of land, essentially.
All right. With the local government elections later this year, there will be a new council with new council strategic plans. How will these be incorporated into the process?
Through Your Worship to Councillor McPhail, I guess the first stage here is essentially a research stage. Once we're given the green light to move ahead with the scoping, I'll be bringing in expertise and resources and consultants and working with the staff team. We will provide council with regular updates as we lead up to the election. We don't anticipate to be bringing any significant policy proposals prior to the election. However, I will add that there is other projects going on with respect to market rental referrals that we will be bringing forward to council this spring. But as far as some of the bigger picture items, they will likely be post-election. And with that, we would then start drafting the first draft of a plan, of a new plan.
Great. I have one more thing. So we've had ongoing discussions with Port Metro Vancouver asking them to protect agricultural land and to respect the city's current 2041 official community plan, as well as the Metro Vancouver 2040, now Metro 2050 regional growth strategy. They recently released their new land use plan. So how will all this be incorporated into the process? Agricultural land is so important in Richmond, but there's that pressure.
Through Your Worship to Councillor McPhail, yes, we'll be dealing with other levels of government with respect to Metro Vancouver. once they do adopt their revised regional growth strategy, we'll be required to have a regional context statement that basically indicates how our new plan will be integrated into the regional plan. We will also be liaising with the port. However, when it comes to the port and the agricultural land, we'll be standing firm that remains as agricultural land. It's in the ALR and protected there as well. So we will be defending the city's interests with other levels of government.
Thank you. So in closing, I'd like to propose overarching themes of resiliency, equity, and adaptation. I think the 6 target areas are spot on and so relevant today, and I know they will be in the future. Thank you to staff for this overview of what's to come. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be supporting all the items on the consent agenda. I have a few comments and perhaps a couple of questions as well, speaking on almost all the items. Item number 8, I really appreciate the feedback that we received from the public when this was first considered, having the community poverty reduction and prevention table. And the main phrase that was coming from the people who were speaking up was the need for lived and living experiences, and that is integral to this table going forward. So I was pleased about that. Item number 9, I have a question that came up since the Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting when this was discussed. Definitely in support of all the components of the housekeeping changes highlighted on our page 58, including the proper spelling of the word dike, D-I-K-E. But the question I had was related to the top bullet point on page 58, where it talks about Metro Vancouver waste discharge permits and non-domestic waste coming from industrial purposes. I just recently received comments from a number of people who are looking into municipal governments to help prevent wastewater coming from industry that's using scrubbers, also referred to as exhaust gas cleaning systems. So they scrub stuff that would go into the air, but then they concentrate the heavy metals, the acids, and the carcinogens and flush it right into the Fraser River. Is that captured already in the language, or is that something that is currently outside of what the city has jurisdiction over?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Wolf, something like that would be captured by our existing bylaw, as well as Metro Vancouver's processes.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. I'll email you directly some further comments. Next item was item 10. Living in East Richmond, I see a lot of use of our waterworks equipment and our very well-covered use of fire hydrants in the city. And that we heard from Deputy Fire Chief about looking into hookup rates to use some of the best drinking water in the world when used for other purposes. So that's, I think, a positive ongoing part of that bylaw. Item number 11, the proposed parking amendments. I know there were some comments earlier about the parking aspect of it. But as I mentioned at the Public Works and Transportation meeting, I've also heard and experienced a lot of the concern with the use of roadways in front of developments, especially when the setback has them so close to the road that if there's no delivery space, then the rest of the population has to deal with the crowding out of our walkways, sidewalks, bike lanes, and traffic services redirecting people. And so I brought that forward as a frustration that I hear a lot from folks. And staff did reply that it would be part of the OCP review in the coming project and scope. So I am pleased about that. And as myself, I used to operate and work for large delivery companies, so I'm familiar with the need for that space for their safety as well. So they're not working in the middle of roadways. So I won't ask a question about that. I did that at committee. Thank you. And then just another final item is number 14, the OCP targeted update, scope and process. So again, at the planning committee, I attended and provided some comments there. And since then, we've seen what's occurred in Surrey lack of public consultation and the backlash, and thankfully some of our members of this council voiced a strong concern, but we ended up coming up short on the vote for what I think was a regionally faulty decision that went forward. Anyway, again, I'm very positive to hear staff's comments on this city-wide OCP amendment being a deep dive, looking to kind of go beyond the status quo and push some very creative and world-leading initiatives forward. Again, we've just recently approved the community energy and emissions plan for the city, the next stage going forward. And one of the main strategic directions there was green infrastructure. And I just really want that we have a section included here in this item about, it's called environmental protection and enhancement. But I'm going to stick with the critique of it so that it truly includes enhancement aspects and not just setting land aside for enhancement later on. And there's so much that can be done now, and with direction in the next OCP, I think we can get there. And I also emphasize the need to not contract out certain positions like ground truthing of environmental assessment. I think that needs to be an in-house decision, and again, I'll consider in the upcoming budgetary processes to suggest that be in place sooner than later. So with that, thank you. Those are all my comments.
Councillor Hobbs.
Oh, thank you, and through the chair, I will be supporting all the items on the consent agenda as well. And I'll only provide comments and a couple of questions on one, and that's item number 14. The proposed scope and process report for the official community plan. And the targeted update is described as a deep dive. I also would describe it as very ambitious and broad, perhaps innovative in terms of the analysis, particularly for the affordable housing challenges that we face. The proposal and the 6 key target areas and 9 steps is also self-described or has been described here as spot on, and I agree with that as well. There is a recognition in the report of the complexities involved in this deep dive, and I appreciate that. And when it comes to things like provincial and federal funding for housing affordability and policy options there. And the examples provided in the report were really interesting too. And one of them was the Cambridge, Massachusetts report or example on 100% affordable housing and the overlay in the creation permitted when it comes to density. So I was trying to think in terms of Richmond, and if you could just comment on that and maybe provide what could be an example in Richmond, because I'm not sure everybody would understand what is meant by 100% affordable overlay over the permitted density.
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, that is certainly one example of, I guess it would be a density bonusing provision for affordable housing only. So in this case, what the proposal is in the Cambridge, or it's a program that began in late 2020, is that for any density bonusing above the base density would have to be earmarked for essentially affordable housing. That is, it would have to be earmarked towards rent being at 30% of income levels. And what they've found so far is there's about 4 or 5 different projects that have taken advantage of this program. And we will be following up on that type of an example to see how we could apply that to the Richmond context. I think an example in Richmond might be the neighborhood service centers would be a really good area where we could look at allowing some additional densities in favor of affordable housing, and that they're close to neighborhood services, community centers, parks, and most importantly, transit service.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it provides an opportunity for a real good socioeconomic mix. So I look forward to that down the road, perhaps. And I also appreciate a couple other points in this, the environmental protection aspect of it. That enhancement, it ties in nicely to what Councillor Wolf just mentioned about the community energy and emissions plan. I think that dovetails quite nicely. Hopefully it will. One thing that's also mentioned that I think is really important is the consultation process. I know we all recognize that as being important, but I think it could be quite crucial to get even more active and a more kind of aggressive or assertive outreach process when it comes to that, because these are substantial kind of policy shifts if they all came to fruition. The other examples were good too, like with the Panache Group in Port Moody, and the consultation list, the Community Land Trust was also very interesting. When it comes to the stakeholder groups, my last question is just that quite an extensive list, but I wondered when it came to local builders, like you mentioned the UDI, but the local building community, would there be a more localized group that would also be included in that?
Through your worship to Councillor Hobbs, yes, there is the UDI staff liaison UDI meeting that we meet on a regular basis. There is also a small builders group that we meet on a regular basis, made up a number of representatives of essentially townhouse, single family, but townhouse and small apartment builders. So we do meet with them whenever we're doing any kind of stakeholder engagement with respect to that's development related.
Okay, good. That's good to hear because I think it's an extensive list and the local builders probably have a good idea on Richmond's take and needs, hopefully. And my last comment will just be about the timeline. And I realize it might appear to be too long in some ways, but I think these are such substantial policy initiatives that success requires a very thorough research and analysis, and that'll make for good policy development in the end. So I think it provides an ambitious scope and process, and I think it's quite exciting actually, and I'm very happy to support it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Au.
Yes, Worship, I'm going to support everything on the consent agenda, and I want to comment on 2 items and ask questions. The first is item number 8, the community poverty reduction and prevention table. I think this is a very important step to form this committee or group to move forward with our goal for poverty reduction. But I have a question on some clarification on CNCL page 54 about membership. In that paragraph, it mentioned there will be 12 members. And further down in the paragraph, it said 3 positions will be held by residents with lived or living experience, including 1 Indigenous community member. I just want to clarify, are we talking about 3 plus 1? 3 people who have that experience plus 1 Indigenous member, or are we talking about 2 plus 1?
Through your worship, the Councillor, we're talking about 3 positions total, which would be 2 persons, well, 3 persons with lived and living experience, but 1 would specifically be an Indigenous community member. Okay,
great. Now, and how about the selection of those people? If we have more than 3 people apply or being nominated or recommended by stakeholders, how are we going to select those 3 people? Do we have any set criteria?
Through your worship to council, our staff will work with those individuals and to have a discussion around the expectations for the committee, make sure it's a good fit, but also to make sure that the committee is reflecting the diversity of Richmond with those positions. With some of the other projects that are coming forward, there will be additional opportunities for residents with lived experience to participate as well. So there'll be lots of opportunities for people.
Okay, and can people apply? You know, do they have to recommended or nominated? Will we give out the information and invite people to apply directly?
Through your worship to Councillor, yes, we will work with the community organizations who directly support residents who have lived living experience, but it will be a call to them to ask people who are interested. From our experience with the development of the Collaborative Action Plan to Reduce and Prevent Poverty, we did have residents with living experience on the steering committee, and those were recruited through organizations, but also representatives from organizations helped build those connections with those individuals.
Good, thank you. And the next item is item 14, the OCP update. I think this is a very important initiative for the city right now, and it's just a major project that will take at least 2 years to complete, right, according to staff's report. And also it will go beyond the current term of the existing council. And I agree with all 6 targeted areas. And especially, I am delighted to see that in the area of affordable housing, we are going to go beyond what we used to do or our conventional approaches to solve the problem. And we are going to see examples nationally and internationally. And we are going to explore innovative approaches to solve the problem. And I have to stress that, I came from Hong Kong, which is a place at one time, more than 70% of the housing units are provided by the government or by non-profit community. So I think that could be one place we can look to. They have an housing authority, and also they have other innovative programs for public housing. But I have a question. Now, as I said, I agree with all the 6 target areas. However, I have the feeling that we have not put enough stress on the study about industrial land. I understand that staff mentioned earlier in the report, page 245, saying that we have accomplished major revisions of the industrial land intensification initiative already. However, my feeling is that this is a very important area in our land use, and I hope that we would not lose sight of this area, and perhaps it's better to bring it also into the forefront, or at least we keep referring to this important area in our review of the OCP, so that we are not talking about the different areas in isolation. Yes, we need more attention for the affordability of houses, but I think we also need to look at other aspects, such as our economic development. So I just want to ask, how are we going to bring that area into the OCP review process?
Through your worship to Councillor Au, with respect to the Industrial Land Intensification Initiative, it is actually still an ongoing process right at the moment, and it's not reflected in the report. When Council did adopt the bylaw amendments, there was actually some future work that still had to be done. One of them was looking at industrial stratification and the impacts there, and there was also a 2-year review period to look at the bylaws and policies that were adopted by Council to see if they're doing what they intend to do is to attract higher density industrial development. So those reports will actually be coming back to Council, it would be about a year from now. And so that is one of the reasons why that's not part of the OCP review. And in fact, it's probably one of several separate projects that will be going on at the same time as the OCP review. The other thing I should also mention too, we make reference to the Farming First strategy. There is no intention to re-review the agricultural policies, but that's another strategy where we indicated to Council that we would come back in a 2-year period and provide an update. So if there is any changes to our agricultural policies at that point, we could also do that as well. So that's so we're not. I wouldn't say we're dismissing or ignoring economic development or industrial policies, but they are kind of a separate process.
Yes, I know that they're a separate process, but I hope that because these areas are actually interconnected, so I just hope that when we bring forward the OCP review, we would always remind people of these other important areas and provide opportunities for people to have the inputs or the insights, on those areas too. So anyway, thank you very much for the initiative.
Okay, Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Worship. I too will be supporting everything on tonight's consent agenda. Just a couple comments and questions from staff. Number 7, the UBC Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program grant submission. We're applying for $50,000 and hopefully we'll get it. And typically our staff, their superpower is recognizing grants that fit us, helping us apply for them, and we often get them. So I'm pretty confident about this one, and I'm excited about it. This will be hosted by the Richmond Public Library. They'll be hosting the outreach and co-leading the project, so that every month there will be outreach sessions that connect residents who are at risk of or living in poverty to the community-based resources and supports. And, I'd like to thank the library for stepping up for something like this, because it is always a safe and welcoming place to get information. And I think, all kinds of different people go. There's no stigma attached to going to the library. And, I think sometimes if you think you are at risk of poverty, of living in poverty, you're afraid and you're shy to go and have this conversation. And I think this is a safe place to have that conversation and to get the resources that you need. Just a question to staff on the housekeeping amendments to waterworks and water rates bylaw. It's been mentioned that the fire hydrant use is going to come later. Who uses our fire hydrants, and under what circumstance would they be using that fire hydrant and using water from it?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, there's a number of different uses and users. That's part of the reason why we have to do a deeper dive and more analysis into how we're going to deal with them. For example, certain farmers use them. There's certain commercial entities that use them, such as the filming industry. So there's a variety of different users.
Okay, thank you. And then the official community plan, the targeted update, proposed scope and process. As been mentioned, we have a number of different focuses, from housing affordability to environmental protection, climate mitigation and adaptation to the administrative updates. And, I think it's really important to go through this process and to look at all these different things. I think, we talk a lot about things like, building affordable homes for people. And then we also have to have that transportation piece in there. We have to have people being able to get where they're going to. I met a refugee family a number of years ago, and they had a son, and the son wanted to play soccer. So we got him signed up for soccer. We got him through the kids sport program. We had people donate soccer equipment to him. But they lived over on 4 Road, and they couldn't get the son to the soccer in the pouring rain in the wintertime because they didn't have a car. And, it's at the end sometimes when those pieces start falling apart, when you realize that the people all living near 5 and Canby have a hard time getting to Hugh Boyd on the transportation program. So our soccer, our most played sport in Canada, half our kids can't get there because it just doesn't work for them unless their family has a vehicle. So I'm excited that we're going to be doing work around this. I'm also interested to know from staff, will it include specifics like location of sports fields and pools and things like this?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, this is certainly a land use plan, so we will be looking at that. Obviously, we're dealing with fixed sites that have parks or fields or whatever it may be, but we will be looking at this through a social equity lens, which is also one of the targeted areas, to see where we can improve accessibility for residents. Yeah.
Okay. And for people who are listening in on this and trying to find out, when will the public begin to see those opportunities to weigh in and share their lived experiences and what's important to them and where they need those extra services or accesses?
Through your worship to Councillor Liu, we anticipate really much significant public engagement after the first phase. The first phase is really a research phase. We will be reaching out to stakeholders, so we will be getting some early input. But with respect to public engagement with neighborhoods, it would likely be after post-election when we have policy papers presented and the research has been conducted, and that we can share ideas and start working together towards a revised plan.
Okay, and how do we make sure that we reach out to maybe some of those families and communities that maybe, aren't your first people that necessarily weigh in on all of these opportunities? They're some of the people that actually maybe we need to hear from the most, but we're not getting to them always.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Liu, that is a challenge in many ways, and hopefully we're getting out of the pandemic and we can start having more face-to-face engagement as we move forward. But there will be a combination of face-to-face engagement, perhaps some targeted engagement as well. If there is a network of people, an association, we can reach out to them to have those opportunities to discuss. And we'll probably also be continuing online engagement as well. So it'll be a combination to try to get as many voices to speak out as possible.
And would we be partnering with the school board to work on things like this as well?
Yes, we would be also working with the school board and other agencies. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Day.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brody. I'll be supporting everything on the consent agenda as well. Number 7 is the City of Richmond grant submissions for poverty reduction. There's actually 3 streams. The first one is $25,000, the second $50,000, and the third $150,000. So I wish staff all the best luck in acquiring some of those grants. Number 8 is the poverty reduction terms of reference, and I think it's all said quite clearly on page 51. Poverty is a complex issue and cannot be solved by any single organization or level of government. And I think it's important to work with our partners, and that's what this is all about, is creating terms of reference to make that happen. Number 11 is zoning bylaws for parking and loading. Well, we've discovered that sometimes we have too large of loading bays in certain developments, and they're actually redundant. We can't afford to waste any space in the downtown core, so that's why we're making some changes. I did want to ask staff, though, if a development comes forward, let's say it's got a big long row of businesses, can we require a larger loading bay in the event in a particular development that we need it?
Through your worship, Councillor Day, it would be difficult for us to require that in that moment, but it is available to the developer if they choose to build it. We don't restrict them from having it, but we are saying that they don't necessarily need to put one in if they don't need it.
So some of the onus of this will be on the developers to make sure that they make a viable option for delivery of product to, if they have, say, 10 or 12 stores. So, okay, good. And number 12 is a rezoning application to allow for 8 townhouses on number 1 road at 6571 and 6591. We do have a letter from the owner of the property just north of this who is opposed to this proposal because he now is going to have a townhouse complex to the north and a townhouse complex to the south. Well, I understand from the report that this owner has been they have approached him numerous times over the last 5-6 years to try to purchase that property. Now, when I look at the map, it shows that the complex is open-ended on the north and the south. If down the road this owner should decide to sell for redevelopment, can that development of his one lot be incorporated into either the complex to the north or the complex to the south? And is there a covenant on one or both of these developments to include that property at 6551 number 1 road?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, yes, the subject development proposal does include driveway access in favor of the site to the north upon redevelopment. We have also secured the concept plan as part of this development to demonstrate that that property can be developed for townhouses in the future.
Okay, good. So we're not closing the book, we're just leaving it open until the owner is ready to move on. Item number 13 is the underlining zoning for all these land use contract lots. And, you know, there's 607 residential units and commercial units in this package. So it's a lot of properties. And the main thing that people need to understand is nothing's changing. We're just updating the bylaws to replace the land use contract rules. And we were mandated by the provincial government to do this by June 30th of 2022. So there's nothing to panic about. It's kind of a housekeeping item. And keeping in mind that these land use contracts have been in place since 1973 to 1979, so they are completely redundant. And number 14 is the official community plan. We're going to have a targeted update. And on page 245, or 246, there's a list of priorities. Number 1 is housing affordability. And the whole point of this is to create a more robust policy framework for the provision of affordable housing. That is critically important because Richmond is facing, like every other community in Metro Vancouver, a housing crisis. Mayor Brody, are we allowed to comment on 14A at this time, or is that after?
No.
Okay, good. Then that's it for me. Thank you very much.
You can't comment on it because the meeting hasn't heard it. All right, so we're going to call the question on the consent agenda. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Brings us to item 14A, which is the item that was added to the agenda. And I brought this forward for obvious reasons, and I'll just read it out. the recommended resolution is whereas Russia has invaded Ukraine, a sovereign nation with a democratically elected government, and whereas the city of Richmond wants to support the people of Ukraine as well as the residents of Ukrainian origin in Richmond and elsewhere, therefore be it resolved that City Council authorizes the Ukrainian flag to be flown on the Richmond City Hall flagpole on number 3 Road. And secondly, that a letter of support for Ukraine be forwarded to the Consul General of Ukraine in Vancouver, and I would so move. So by way of background, I think everybody is very familiar, frankly, too familiar with what has gone on in Ukraine. A very, very sad situation, and it not only impacts an entire country there, but it impacts on many people here in our own community and certainly in the province and in Canada. We have a fairly restrictive flag policy for either displaying flags or lowering flags in the city of Richmond that has been long-standing. And of course, we can amend any kind of a policy on a one-off basis as the council would so choose. So the idea is that on the flagpole on the number 3 Road side, we would display the Ukrainian flag. That location was chosen because with COVID, there are 3 flagpoles on the plaza, and probably more often one of those flagpoles would have been used. But right now it's got the Canadian, the BC, and the Richmond flags on it. But with COVID, and only a limited number of people coming into City Hall will get far greater coverage, far greater notice if we fly the flag from the number 3 Road side. And in terms of a letter of support for the Ukraine, we would forward that to the Consul General of Ukraine, indicating what is the tenor of the motion, that we wish to show our support for the people of Ukraine, both back in the Ukraine, but also local people as well, because we are, I believe, in full sympathy. The news is just nonstop as to the terrible and tragic events that are taking place in the Ukraine. And there's not a lot that a municipal government halfway around the world can do, but I think that we can indicate our support and make it known that where we stand as a group. And that's the reason for bringing forward this resolution. Councillor Day.
Now, thank you. I'll be supporting this 100%. And I just wanted to let people know that if you want to donate to the Red Cross, the federal government is matching it dollar for dollar up to $10 million. So I've just recently donated myself, and I would encourage people to do that as well.
Councillor Howe.
Your Worship, I'm in full support of this motion, and I think this is absolutely the right thing to do at this moment. But I want to ask staff, can staff provide us some information about the Ukrainian community in Richmond? I think perhaps this is also an opportunity to educate the public about the Ukrainian community. I know that they have a community center. I know that they have a church. I know that they have a senior housing society. But perhaps, we should provide more information to the general public so that they know they actually have Ukrainian neighbors next to them. And I think this is a good gesture for us to extend our care and concern of this group of members among us. And I would suggest that everybody would do whatever they can to extend goodwill to the Ukrainian community, and also make a donation as being proposed.
We'll ask staff, do you have specific statistics on the size of the Ukrainian population in Richmond? Does anybody have that? I'm not seeing anybody coming forward. Serena, can you help us out there? Do you have any idea?
Thank you, Mayor Brody. No, not specifics, but we could certainly provide you with some information in a memo. Yeah.
Yes, that'd be great.
Frankly, you raise a valid point. I would say, though, as long as we've got one person in the community, it's worth this gesture, and I think that it behooves us to do it.
I agree, but I think this is also an opportunity for us to get to know the people.
Yes, absolutely true. Absolutely true. Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. First of all, thank you for bringing this forward. I'll be supporting it without hesitation, 100%, and very happy to do so. I'll make one quick comment with regard to the Ukrainian population in Canada. It has been widely reported that Canada has the third largest Ukrainian population outside of the Ukraine, or outside of Ukraine and outside of Russia. Canada would have the third largest. Thank you very much for bringing it forward, and I'll support it 100%.
Yes, thank you. Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, for bringing it forward, probably being the only councillor on here that is of Ukrainian descent. On my mother's side, I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate the comments that are evident. I'm getting texts from Sault Ste. Marie and all my cousins and saying, Cousin Bill, aren't these people living near here? Aren't our friends and aren't our relatives living near here? And sending videos back. And I think it's a noble gesture to do. It is absolutely horrendous. It's the lowest portion of mankind that we can ever see. And all you got to do is look at your video, and you can dial in any one of those cities, and they'll show you what's happening there. So I think I would hope that if the community asks help from City Council later down the road, then we would be in a position to consider that as well. So thank you for bringing it forward, and we appreciate, long live the Ukrainians, and thank them for defending our democracy.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Anybody opposed to that? That is carried. Brings us to public announcements. And we do have a few of those tonight. First of all, from the closed council meeting this afternoon, we have some contracts for the Stevenson Community Center and the Branch Library. The architectural services contract has been awarded to HDR Architecture Associates, Inc. And the construction manager pre-construction services contract is going to be awarded to Scott Construction Group. We also have two appointments which have terms that last until December 31st, 2023. Bronwyn Bailey has been reappointed to the Advisory Design Panel, and Ursabet Instituritz was reappointed to the Food Security and Agricultural Advisory Committee as a representative from ACE. Going beyond those announcements, first of all, we've got some programs for spring break. Spring break is almost here, and registration is now open for in-person and online programs between March 12th and 27th. The options include swimming, skating, nature experiences, day camp, and more. Browse and register for programs for all ages and abilities at richmond.ca/register. Then we have drop-in group fitness classes. They are returning. In accordance with the recent changes to provincial health orders, pre-registration for group exercise classes is no longer required beginning today. That means that all fitness center equipment is again available for drop-in use, so residents can now reactivate fitness passes and return to regular fitness routines. Information on the various classes and fitness centers is on the city's website. Then looking to the Richmond Arts Awards, something we look forward to each and every year. Nominations are now underway for the 14th Annual Richmond Arts Awards. Awards which will once again be presented in several categories. And that includes arts education, innovation, business, cultural leadership, and volunteerism. So if you want to submit a nomination, go to richmond.ca/arts awards. Nominations close Monday, March 7th at 5:00 p.m. So you don't want to miss that deadline. And finally, we have International Women's Day. Tuesday, March 8th is International Women's Day. This is a global day of celebration for the achievements of women, including visibility and calling out gender inequality. This year's theme is Break the Bias, with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in all cultures and societies. For information, go to internationalwomensday.com. So with that, we will go to bylaws for adoption. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first three bylaws have no noted opposition, and the fourth bylaw has opposition.
So that's the first three. The first three are moved. Is it seconded? Seconded. Any discussion there? All those in favor, opposed, carried. And the final one, which is bylaw 9834, so that's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was not on council at the time of this decision, so I received a memo that I don't think everyone else received, or perhaps Councillor Hobbs did. So I have some page numbers, but I won't read them out because you don't have it in front of you. Anyhow, so I just have a couple of questions of staff. Now that I'm thoroughly aware of this proposal, and I'm very aware of the site. My first question is related to the tenants that were on the site in the package. I guess back when this was received, there was like a petition that was submitted to the city.
This is
about.
You know that this is about land use, and you know that this is for
yes,
final reading, and that you know that this has gone through a public hearing.
Yes.
So I don't know what we're asking about tenants. This is about land use.
Okay, yes. And as we're about to go through an OCP, I would hope that this type of a project doesn't happen again, because we've had this land sitting vacant in a very good location for access to facilities and bus stops and all that. But it's been empty, and we've had a number of tenants and Salvation Army shelter that were in that place. So my first question is, were we able to secure places for all who were moved from a site like this?
Councillor, I've told you, this is about land use. We've gone through public hearing. All those questions have been taken care of. Now we're on to final adoption. If you agree with the land use, you support it, and if you don't, then don't support it.
Thank you. My next question then relates to the setback on a property like this away from Shell Road, and there were variances that were approved, and then the amount of tree loss. So if you look at a property like this, there were trees that could have been retained at least for the 4 years that it's been sitting there. But I know we've just approved, like 2 items ago or 3 items ago, the bylaw for adoption 10343 was about added tree protection. Would have those trees or any of them received any further protection under the new bylaw that we've just approved?
Councillor Wolf, we're not talking of the new bylaw for this one. It goes back many years, as you have observed. If you like it, you support it. If you don't support it.
Thank you. You cleared my plate. I will not support it.
Call the question. All those in support? Those opposed? It's Councillor Day, Councillor Wolf opposed. It is carried. Madam Clerk, Development Permit Panel.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are 2 recommendations for council. Recommendation 1, that the chair's report for the Development Permit Panel meeting held on April 14th, 2021 be received from information. And recommendation 2, that the recommendation of the panel to authorize the issuance of a development permit for the property located at 10760, 10780 Bridgeport Road and 3033, 3091, 3111 Shell Road be endorsed and the permit so issued.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? You're opposed, Councillor Day, is that what you're saying? Well, either you are or you're not. It is carried with Councillor Day opposed. Someone move adjournment. Thank you, we're now adjourned.